All right, so welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And this time, we're going to be looking at something that I think a lot of us can relate to, and that is this idea of older games. You know, the games we grew up with, the games that are near and dear to our hearts. What happens to them?
Yeah.
As technology marches on, as new operating systems come out, new hardware comes out, what happens to these games? Do they just fade away into oblivion?
It's a big question.
Yeah.
And it's a question that
we've got this great message from a listener.
Okay.
And I think this is a good place to kind of jump off for this deep dive.
Yeah.
And they're talking about this game, Little Fighter 2.
Okay.
And basically their plea is, look, this game is no longer playable on modern systems.
Wow.
And they're basically saying, look, you know, it's a part of gaming history is being left behind.
Oh, I can see the passion in that plea.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They're saying the game deserves a second life on today's computers. So let's unpack that a little bit. I mean, first of all, when you hear that someone can't play a game, they love because of technology.
Right.
What goes through your mind?
Well, you know, it's funny, you know, we think of video games as this digital medium.
Right.
But it really does depend on, you know, hardware, right?
Yeah.
And we're so used to like, oh, you know, you just get the new console or you just upgrade your PC and everything just works. But there's all these different layers of, you know, programming languages and, you know, the way that the hardware interfaces with the software.
Right.
And so, you know, to bring a game from, you know, even 10 years ago, let alone, you know, 20 or 30 years ago to a modern system can be a big challenge because it's like you're trying to translate something from an ancient language into a modern language.
Okay, so it really is a translation issue.
It really is.
Yeah, and they were saying, you know, it's like a part of gaming history is being left behind. I mean, is it really that dramatic? Is it really like we're losing?
I think so.
History here.
I think in some ways, yeah, because, you know, these older games are a snapshot of the technology, of the creativity, you know, of the time they were created.
Of the culture.
Of the culture.
Yeah.
And when those games become inaccessible, it's like losing a piece of a museum.
Right.
You know, it's like if suddenly you couldn't go see a certain, you know, a certain painting or a certain sculpture.
So, you know, our listener was mentioning a few solutions.
Yeah.
And I think these are probably things that a lot of people have heard of.
Right.
You know, remastering, porting, and emulation.
Yeah.
Let's kind of break down those a little bit. Like, what's the difference between these, you know?
Yeah.
Because
I think, you know, to the average gamer, they might just
sound the same.
All sound kind of the same, but they're they're pretty distinct.
Yeah,
so when we talk about remastering, we're essentially talking about taking the original game and giving it a fresh coat of paint, right? So updating the graphics, you know, maybe improving the audio, maybe even tweaking some of the gameplay if it's, you know, if it's really clunky.
To make it more modern.
To kind of modernize it, but really preserving the core experience of the original game.
So is there like a classic example that comes to mind when you
I mean, one
think of remastering
that always jumps out is the Crash Bandicoot Insane trilogy.
Oh yeah.
You know, it took those classic PlayStation games, gave them, you know, beautiful new graphics, you know, made them run smoother.
So you're not jarred by the old graphics,
exactly. You still got that core Crash Bandicoot gameplay, but it felt modern and it felt fresh.
All right, so that's remastering.
Yeah.
Now what about porting?
So porting is a little bit different. You're not necessarily updating the graphics or the audio.
Okay.
You're essentially taking the game's code and adapting it to run on a new platform.
Okay.
So a good example of this would be Grand Theft Auto V.
Okay.
You know, it was a huge hit on consoles.
Yeah.
But then they ported it to PC.
Right.
And it allowed a whole new audience to experience that game.
Okay, so it's literally just getting it to run.
It's literally
a different machine.
Taking that code and making it work on a different hardware architecture.
All right, and then there's this other one, which is like a little mysterious emulation. What is that all about?
Emulation is, it's fascinating.
Okay.
So imagine you have this this old arcade cabinet, right? And you want to make it work on, you know, your modern TV.
Yeah.
What emulation does is it creates a virtual version. Oh, wow.
Of that original hardware inside your computer.
I don't have to have the actual hardware.
You don't need the physical
amazing.
cartridge. You don't need the, the arcade board or whatever. It's all done in software.
So, like, if I wanted to play, like, Super Mario 64, and I don't have a Nintendo 64 anymore, I could just...
You could use an emulator. That mimics the Nintendo 64 hardware.
That's incredible.
And play that game on your PC.
Wow. Okay, so there are solutions out there.
There are solutions.
But, our listener was specifically talking about, Little Fighter 2, and they're making this plea to the developers. Hey, give this game a second life. Do developers actually listen to that kind of stuff? I mean...
Well, it's tough to say, right? Because on the one hand, developers are creators. They're passionate about their games.
And they, I'm sure they love the idea of their games being enjoyed by new audiences. But there's also, the reality of the business. They have to...
They're going to pay the bills.
Consider, do they still own the rights to the game?
Oh, that's a good point.
Do they even have the original source code?
Wow. Yeah.
And frankly, will it make money? Because reviving a game can be expensive. You might have to, do a lot of recoding. You might have to pay licensing fees. All those things factor in.
So it's not just like they just snap their fingers and it happens.
It's not this whole process.
It's a much more complex equation.
Now, you mentioned this idea of like losing a piece of history. Like, what is the big deal about preserving these old games? I mean,
well, I think it's...
Are they really that important? I think it's easy to dismiss them as just, old, outdated, pixelated things.
Like, why bother?
But they represent, a stage in the evolution of this medium. You wouldn't dismiss the first silent films just because they're, black and white and they're jerky.
They were groundbreaking for their time.
They help lead to, the films we have today.
And they're a product of their time as well.
Exactly. And so I think these games deserve to be preserved.
Now, are there people out there
Absolutely
actually doing that? Like, are there organizations or companies or people that are trying to do this?
There are some really great
what are some
examples?
So one company that comes to mind is GOG.com.
And they specialize in taking these older PC games and making them compatible with modern systems.
So you can actually play them.
You can actually play them.
Without having to worry about all the compatibility issues.
Without having to, fiddle with settings and all that stuff. And they also do a great job of providing context.
Oh, because bonus material.
Here's the game, play it.
It's not just like they gave you the whole...
Here's a ROM, good luck. It's like, no, this is the game. This is why it was important. This is, the impact it had.
So it's like a museum.
It's like a digital museum.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Now, are there any others, like, besides GOG that are doing this kind of...
Yeah, there are.
Preservation work?
There are organizations like the Video Game History Foundation. And they actually go out and collect, old cartridges.
Really? Design documents, all sorts of artifacts from video game history.
So they're like archaeologists.
They're like video game archaeologists.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And they work with libraries and museums.
Oh, wow.
To make sure that this stuff...
To actually
preserve it.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So let's kind of step back for a second.
Okay.
Big picture here.
Yeah.
We've kind of touched on a lot of different things here.
We have.
What are the key takeaways? Like, what's the big picture?
Well, I think the big picture is that video game preservation is important.
Right.
It's not just about nostalgia. It's about understanding our history.
Right.
Understanding the evolution of this art form.
Right.
And it's about making sure that these games remain accessible to future generations.
And that future generations can learn from them.
Absolutely.
And experience them.
Yeah. And I think it's an ongoing challenge.
Right.
Because technology is always
it's always changing.
Evolving. Yeah. So we're always going to be having to find new solutions to preserve these old games.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I want to leave our listeners with a question.
Okay.
What classic game would you love to see revived?
Good question.
On modern systems?
Yeah.
Head over to our social media. Let us know. Let us know. Use the hashtag.
Tell us a second chance.
What game deserves a second chance?
Yeah.
Right. Until next time, everybody, keep on gaming, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.
Absolutely. Take care.
Expert.